Hi, Smart News. On this day in history, the Continental Congress approved the very first American flag, and it has changed 27 times since then. Which brings up a question about national identity, which is so much a part of many of our news stories, although we don't really speak directly about that. National identity and how our personal identity really fits into what we think the nation is all about. But it'll be a good theme for this week's news, so let's get started. The first story I want to put on your radar has to do with the U.S. southern border because we have brand new data that gives us a picture as to what's actually happening there, and it is historic. We haven't seen these sorts of numbers in modern data collection. So these are record numbers. Over the last 3 months or the last 90 days, more than 500,000 people have been encountered at the U.S. southern border, which means that Border Patrol agents confronted these individuals in some way, either apprehending them, taking them into custody, expelling them, or allowing them to stay in certain circumstances. The reason why this story matters isn't just about historic data, although that's important to know. It's also about human exploitation. It's easy to get distracted with the numbers and the political conversation about the border, but what are we really talking about? We're talking about human traffickers that are trying to get people across the border, often in very dangerous situations. And something I've seen mentioned by Customs and Border Protection are these resurfacing of large groups, often more than 100 people traveling together at one time. When that happens, Border Patrol has to care for these people that are making such a dangerous trip and are often in a very bad situation. And when that's the case, and Border Patrol has to put resources there, you have others, like drug cartels, using that as an opportunity to cross the border. So this is not just about historic data. It's not just about a political conversation. It's also about human exploitation and human trafficking. Something to note, over the last several months, although the numbers have been very high, the numbers of unaccompanied minors has declined slightly, still at a historic level, so it's important to note that. But I also want to make you aware of something. When an unaccompanied minor, so someone 17 and younger, is taken into custody by the U.S. government, they're transferred to Health and Human Services, and they're given medical attention, health care. Often that includes vaccinations. And in this particular case, because of the time and place that we're in, often these minors are given a COVID-19 vaccine without any sort of parental or guardian permission, because now the U.S. government is responsible for their care. It's just something interesting to note that is very specific to the times that we're in. Speaking of the COVID-19 vaccine in young adults, I want to make you aware of an emergency meeting that's happening later in this week to look at a rare condition that is surfacing in young adults who received 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine, so either Pfizer or Moderna, a rare condition that is surfacing. It's called myocarditis, and it's inflammation of the heart muscle. It can be very minor and passing, or it can be severe. And just for context, remember 140 million plus Americans have received full vaccine doses. We're talking about less than 500 young adults that have experienced this condition to varying degrees. As of the last data released, about 15 still remained in the hospital, but most had recovered. It's important to note that myocarditis can be caused by COVID. It can actually be caused by the infection, so note that. However, there are some doctors that are now suggesting that young adults that are due for their second shot wait for a moment while health officials take a closer look at this. It's not the condition itself that's causing the health officials pause. It's the frequency of it. And that's what they want to take a look at because they're not quite sure, is the vaccine causing it? Or is this an association somehow? And that's what they need to dig into further. It's also important to note the CDC just last week said these 2 doses are really important for proper immunity against the variants of the virus that causes COVID-19. And finally, President Biden's trip continues overseas, his very first foreign trip of the administration. And this is an important trip, a very busy week. Today, President Biden is meeting with key NATO allies. NATO is a defense alliance, which means basically if I go to war, you're coming with me if we're part of the same alliance. This is what happened in Afghanistan. America went to war. Our NATO allies came with us to support. Today, President Biden is meeting with the president of Turkey. Turkey is a key strategic ally inside NATO, but there's been questions over the years whether or not Turkey's government actually shares the same values as other member nations. So we'll watch for headlines coming out of that conversation. It is no coincidence that we're seeing this major meeting of NATO allies right before the president's final meeting in Europe with a country that is not a part of the alliance. And on Wednesday, President Biden is going to be meeting with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. A lot to talk about there. This is an important trip again because the president is reintroducing himself and America to the world. And just seeing who he meets gives us an idea of how unique America's leadership really is. We saw President Biden meet with Queen Elizabeth. She's the head of the royal family. She's not necessarily a political figure, but she's been in power for 70 years. She's met with 13 American presidents. Vladimir Putin, he's been in power more or less for more than 2 decades. Doesn't look to be slowing down at all. So again, that gives you some perspective on the uniqueness of America's leadership in that we change or have the opportunity to change every 4 years. And America's evolution is out in the open for everyone to see really all the time, but you can see it specifically in our flag that's changed more than 24 times since on this day in 1777, the Continental Congress was like, that's the design. But did you know that we actually don't know who designed the original American flag? I know what you're thinking. Betsy Ross, right? Maybe she sewed it, but we don't have historical documentation to actually prove it. And some believe a New Jersey congressman might be responsible for the original design itself. But again, there's a lack of historical documentation. So the maker of the very first American flag remains a bit of a mystery. And speaking of Flag Day, we actually have something special for you. We have brand new limited edition Smarter News t-shirts in 2 very special colors. These are for my kids. They just came in. That's why they're small. They don't know they're going to be modeling them later, but expect to be seeing them in blue or in red. And we have adult sizes too. So you can pre-order these for the July 4th holiday. You can be patriotic and you can support a free press. I mean, what a great combination. Use Flag Day and you get 15% off for the next week off of our entire shop. And you can visit that at smarternews.com. So a lot to watch for this week. We'll continue to watch the president's moves overseas and a whole bunch of different stories that are bubbling up. I'm curious to hear from you. What would you like to hear more about? Please let me know. Questions, comments, and as always, more on smarternews.com. Have a great week.